This is Gilbert Gottfried, and this is Gilbert Gottfried's amazing Colossal podcast with my co-host Frank Santopadre. Our guest this week for our special Halloween episode is an actor, producer, writer, and the director of some of the most popular and successful horror and suspense films of the last 4 decades. He was a member of the famed Actors Studio and studied under the great Lee Strasberg before going on to appear in feature films, soap operas, and TV shows such as 77 Sunset Strip, Combat, Medical Center, The Incredible Hulk, and the miniseries The Winds of War and The Stand. But it's his work behind the camera that's brought him the most acclaim. Writing and directing feature films such as The Beast Within, Class of 1984, Psycho 2, Cloak and Dagger, The Temp, Thinner, Fright Night, and the original Child's Play. In a career spanning over 50 years, he's worked with or shared the screen with performers such as Ingrid Bergman, Anthony Quinn, Roddy McDowall, Harrison Ford, Jack Warden, Brad Pitt, Anthony Perkins, and Stephen King, as well as former podcast guests Steven Weber, Whoopi Goldberg, Bruce Stern, Mick Garris. Please welcome to the show the man responsible for unleashing Chucky onto the unsuspecting world, and a man who recently received thousands of congratulatory messages from people who thought he was playing the new Spider-Man. A genuine master of horror, Tom Holland.
Oh, thank you, Gilbert. Thank you very much.
Welcome, Tom.
And I can tell you, before I left the house, this is true, I said something, well, I'm going to be interviewing Tom Holland today, and my 9-year-old son, Max, got very excited. And then I said, no, he's not Spider-Man. and then he was basically like, fuck him. Yeah.
I've never been able to use my real name. There's always been somebody else who had it first. Terrible.
Did you really get messages from people? It was tongue in cheek, right? People knew you weren't playing Spider-Man.
Somebody took Spider-Man and photoshopped my head on top of Spider-Man, and it went viral.
That's great.
And I think at that point I was 70 years old. So it was like, oh my God, they got an old man playing Spider-Man. I didn't even know there was a young actor named Tom Holland.
There you go.
And we're both very thrilled to hear that you're a fan of the podcast.
Oh, I am. Well, I caught you, Gilbert, I don't know, when I did Langoliers, the miniseries, the Stephen King miniseries.
Sure.
And I was casting, and I looked at Balky. I looked at
Bronson Pinchot.
Yes, Bronson Pinchot. And I was looking at him in Beverly Hills Cop. And I don't know how, but I came across your scene with Eddie Murphy. And you were I don't, maybe I'm wrong, but you were improvising. You were, and it was so alive. And Eddie Murphy looked like he was trying to catch up, and you popped. I mean, you popped out as a character actor, and it stayed in my head. And so, so when this came up, I thought, oh my goodness, I know the name. And I thought about it, and then I remembered. You were just terrific. Oh, you should be a character actor. I don't know why you're doing this.
Yeah, why are you doing this? Well, he's done a lot of character work in films. A fair amount.
I think of it mainly as I think of you, Gilbert, now mainly as a voice artist. But but you can act.
Oh, thank you.
No, really. That it's very, very hard to do improv, on film and hold it together in a coherent manner that you can cut a scene, in 2 minutes or whatever.
Did you and Eddie improvise that entire scene?
Yeah.
Just there was nothing on the page.
There was something like, I've got these traffic tickets, and I say, is there some way we can avoid this unpleasantness?
I see.
And then we just started doing it different each time.
If you've got somebody who can improvise, the groundlings, whatever. If you give them the basic situation, and then you let them go, but you give them a time limit, and if you can, you set up an objective, something they have to do in the scene, like Gilbert has to bribe the cop and get out of the traffic ticket, and then and the cop has to say no or whatever, but you give them opposing, conflicting, goals, and then you step back and let them go. And you get a kind of freshness that comes out of the moment that you don't get with scripted material. And it pops on the screen, especially if it's surrounded by scripted material. And that's what I saw in that scene in Beverly Hills Cop 2, 3? 2. Okay.
Yeah, 2.
Okay. But I was looking at Bronson Pinchot. And Bronson can do that too, but he hasn't got your comedic turn particularly.
How nice when a guest comes and flatters you, Gilbert.
I just want you to talk about me for the rest of the interview.
Well, how did you start? Because somewhere because of course I looked you up, Wikipedia or whatever, you started just walking in blind at 15 and doing stand-up?
Yes, yeah. First time I got on a comedy stage, I was 15. And I just started going to comedy clubs every night.
Were you the kid in the back of the class in the 4th grade that was cutting up all the time?
No, you know what I find? That the kids who are the class clowns are the ones that come up to me after a show and say, I'm the funniest guy in my office.
Yeah. Well, as long as you're talking about school, tell Tom the OS story, because I think he's one of the few people who'll appreciate it.
Oh, okay. This is what a scary old movie pathetic kid I was.
Yeah.
One time, I think it was like in kindergarten or the 1st grade, the teacher is playing a game with us saying, I'll say some initials and you say famous people. And so, MM, and they'd say Mickey Mouse, and,
I thought Marilyn Monroe, but.
Yeah, JL, Jerry Lewis. And then she goes, OS. And me, a little kid, I jump up excitedly and go, Onslow Stevens.
Where does where does it come from?
Yeah.
That's a good question.
You don't know, Gilbert, right?
No, I don't know. But I just...
Well, how are you? How old are you in the 6th grade? You're maybe... in the 6th grade, excuse me, in the 1st grade. You're maybe 6, 7?
Yeah.
And you knew Onslow Stevens.
I knew Onslow Stevens, yeah.
Oh, boy. Yeah, no. But anyway, 15 hit me because I got into the business in the summer of my 16th birthday, which means when I was 15, I got a job apprenticing at Bucks County Playhouse in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. And that's how I sort of got into this.
Now, can I ask you, what did you think the Langoliers looked like in that TV movie?
That's not quite a fair question because, that was just at the beginning of CGI.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I know now, in retrospect, that it was hokey and all the rest of it. But I got to tell you, at the time, it was breaking down barriers and trying to figure out how to do it with very, very limited computer power. And also, naturally, the producers didn't want to pay for it to render it. So it's set on top of the 16 mil image. I shot it in 16 mil. The producers were so cheap, but the show itself, the miniseries, I thought was just. I'm prejudiced, but I thought it was just terrific, and it had a terrific cast, and it was because the cast was so damn good it worked. And also, Steven wrote a mousetrap of a novella. I mean, you could really, one scene did follow. The narrative was very, very strong. When Steven's on, he's got the gift of narrative, So, and that was an example of it. I mean, that was in a collection of short stories, I think, but that was the one that was the grabber. You started to read it and you couldn't stop it because the opening hook was so strong. People woke up in an airplane and everybody was gone except about 10 of them. And they were in mid-flight, and what the hell happened? And then they landed at an empty airport. Mm-hmm. And I was shooting that in Bangor because Stephen wanted to bring work into Maine, and it was in the height of the summer season when it was just packed with crowds. And I had to figure out how to shoot, and make it seem empty. I think at one point I had 7 or 8 scenes that weren't completed going at the same time. It was a production nightmare, but the cast was just terrific.
Oh, David Morris, yeah, Dean Stockwell,
yeah, Dean. Well, Dean, I mean, how can you get any more experience than that?
He's great.
Yeah, and Bronson, who's multi-talented and totally mad, turned in a hell of a job. So it was just everybody was good, and I'm not thinking of all the names now, but it was a terrific ensemble cast. I thought.
Dean Stockwell was in Beverly Hills Cop 2.
There you go.
No kidding.
Full circle.
Well, I think he was in almost everything.
Yes, he was.
My God.
Yes, he was.
The boy with the green hair was like 1948? Or,
he was in the business early like you guys were.
Well, he was even younger than us.
Yeah, that's right.
I talked to Roddy McDowell, and Roddy did How Green Was My Valley at 7 or 8 years old.
Something like that. Jeez. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Now, you've worked with him at least twice, Roddy McDowell.
I worked, he was in class of 84.
Right,
yeah.
Which you wrote.
And that was how do you say this polite? It echoed Asphalt Jungle. It was an updating of that. And Robbie's performance was just terrific. Roddy could move you. And he also, there was something adorable about Roddy. So when he came in, he realized what the power was of Fright Night. And he was desperate to play Peter Vincent. And then he came up with the image of the lion from the Cowardly Lion from Wizard of Oz. And he was both moving and funny and adorable. And if you look at Fright Night, the one that makes it go is Charlie Brewster, the teen who sees the vampire next door chomping down on a girl. Mm-hmm. But he's on purpose during the entire thing. But the hero's journey is Peter Vincent, Roddy McDowell, because he's a fake and a phony and he's a coward. I mean, he's a ham actor who doesn't believe any of the movies that he made. I mean, I ended up having lunch one day with Christopher Lee.
Wow.
And Christopher Lee could have been Roddy McDowell, except he had absolutely no sense of humor.
Well, tell us who you wanted.
None whatsoever, but he was the ham actor of all time.
Of course. Well, tell us who you wanted for that part, for Peter Vincent.
I wanted Vincent Price, but Vincent, I mean, because I grew up with Vincent Price,
sure.
And I wanted Vincent, but he was in failing health at that time. And then Roddy had me to dinner at his house with Vincent Price and his wife Coral Brown. And I think to myself, if only I brought my autographed book. I mean, in so many places, all my life I think that. But I didn't because it seemed, in bad taste.
Sure.
And so I sat down with Vincent Price, and all I wanted to talk about was the Roger Corman movies, and all he wanted to talk about was his new cookbook.
That's great.
It's true. He was a gourmand.
And the character is named Peter Vincent. Why?
Well, for Vincent Price and Peter Cushing.
There you go.
They were my two favorite actors growing up and watching horror movies in the 50s.
I love them both, sure.
Yeah.
So Christopher Lee was full of himself.
Oh, he was insufferable. I mean, I said it was at a party that was full of expats, British expats in Hollywood, and I also wanted to talk to him about how great I thought he was in all those Hammer films.
Uh-huh.
And I couldn't get a word in edgewise because he just finished playing Sauron in Lord of the Rings.
Yes, that sounds right.
And all he wanted to do was talk about that. And I give him credit for that because he was forward looking. And I don't know what he was then. He's probably in his 80s. But he wasn't going to stop. But he really was Peter Vincent without the humor.
And I heard he was such an egotist that when he put on like any monster makeup, he kept his toupee on.
I believe it.
Like in those mummy movies, they wrap the bandages over his toupee.
I wouldn't be surprised.
I'm going to put Gil on the spot. You want to hear a pretty good Vincent Price impression, Tom?
Yeah, sure.
Go ahead, Gil.
Yeah, I met him twice, and it was, of course, exciting. One time I was a regular on Thick of the Night, that Alan Thicke talk show, and I went on and did a bit, and I was doing some imitations, and after I get off, I feel a large hand on my shoulder, and I turn around, and it's Vincent Price, and he goes, "I loved your Peter Lorre imitation."
Oh, God, can you do Peter Lorre?
Oh, yes.
Danny.
Do Peter Lorre.
Okay. No, it was you who bundled it. You, your stupid attempt to buy it. Kevin found out how valuable it was. No wonder he had such an easy time stealing it. You bloated fathead.
That's great. That's the Falcon. That's the Falcon,
yeah,
right?
You got it.
Yes.
Yeah, the other great performance is M.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, incredible.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Incredible
that is
performance.
That's
Terrifying.
terrifying, actually, but heartbreaking at the same time.
Absolutely.
He was a brilliant actor. We're talking about wonderful talents.
Oh, yeah. These are the names that come up on this show all the time.
Oh, and then years later, I run into Vincent Price, and I say, "You probably don't remember me. We met on the Alan Thicke show." And he said, "Oh, yes, that was a terrible show."
Oh, God. I wonder, yeah, but, if you look at the earlier work back in the 50s before he got into genre, he was a hell of an actor.
Oh, he was.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I can't pull the names now, but he was doing noir.
Well, he's in Laura.
Yes, that's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
In Laura, he has that line. They say, "Oh, do you know a lot about music?" And he goes, "I don't know a lot about anything, but I know a little about practically everything."
Perfect.
But I think the other thing he really knew about besides cooking was art.
Yes.
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 Yeah, yeah.
Major
collector.
I like those Fibes movies. I mean, they're real real tongue-in-cheek and real campy.
Yeah, they don't do that anymore, do they?
They don't do them. Or Theater of Blood.
Theater of Blood was terrific. Now you're back in the what? Late 60s?
In the 70s even. Yeah.
Even 70s
He's
Theater
just
of Blood?
having the time of his life chewing the scenery, and you just can't take your eyes off him.
That's where he goes around and kills the critics who give him bad reviews?
Yes.
That's the one.
I felt that way.
Yeah, Robert Morley.
Felt that way. Yeah, Robert Morley.
Frank, how did you learn so much about, how can you hold it all?
I don't know, Tom. I'm a bit of a savant. I grew up, I'm a writer, so I grew up reading credits and reading writers' names and reading directors' names and just getting to, just familiarizing myself with it. I'm the kind of guy that'll get in bed with Leonard Maltin's TV movie book, which has like 100,000 movies in it, and memorize the casts, which is just sick, I realize. But
no.
Comes in handy for a show like this.
No, I used to be like that. I thought in my ego, I thought that in the very early 80s, I thought I'd seen every sound movie. And I could name not every, but I could name the actors in the movies. And we used to play the movie game. You know, you'd name a movie and then you have to name an actor that starred in it.
Right.
And then the other person would have to name another movie that actor was in. And you keep it going.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought I was really the champ until I got the Psycho 2, and I was playing with Tony Perkins, and Tony said, "Okay, enough of this. Let's go to cinematographers and composers." And he knew him.
Oh, my God.
Wow. Oh, tell
Yeah,
us about Anthony Perkins.
Oh, God. You want to... he's a brilliant actor. He's probably maybe the smartest actor I ever met. I mean, he was. It's hard for me to tell, but he was borderline brilliant. But he was also Norman. There was something tortured about him.
Interesting.
And since I know a bit about him, I have a good idea of what it was. But I mean, that whole family's been dogged by tragedy. His wife was a Berenson.
Right.
And she was on...
Oh, she was killed in 9/11. That's right.
Yeah, the first or second airplane.
That's right.
And she left two boys.
Yeah.
And one of them's a filmmaker and very talented. So, I try to be careful because you want to be kind. And yet at the same time, you want to dig the dirt. But Tony, I think, I know, he decided he didn't want to be gay, and he made definite moves to go straight. And it looked to he had a very, very good relationship with his wife, and they were great with their kids. But somehow in that tumult, there was this struggle, this pain, and it came over. And all of it also, let me tell you how smart he was. He was best friends with Stephen Sondheim.
Oh, yeah, they wrote that wonderful movie for Herbert Ross.
How awful about Sheila?
Last of Sheila.
Last of Sheila.
Yeah, because I know they were into puzzles.
But can you imagine playing a puzzle with Stephen Sondheim? I mean, or playing the trivia game with Stephen Sondheim. I mean, that's what Tony was capable of, and he was. His Psycho 2 resuscitated his career, but he was also very bitter that his career had been wrecked by Psycho 2, not by Psycho 2, but by Psycho the original by Norman.
By Norman Bates, yeah.
And he told me he had no idea. He'd flown back to New York for 3 or 4 days while they did the shower scene. He had no idea that he was creating such an indelible character.
Wow.
I'll also say something else. I don't know, Psycho 2 was what, 1961, 60?
Oh, you mean the first one? Yeah. 60.
60, okay. And that was a huge revelation to me. I had been a film fanatic, but I don't think I really understood what editing was. Mm-hmm. And then I saw Psycho, and all of a sudden I knew that they put together pieces of film to give the effect. And that was really stunning to me. That made me want to be a filmmaker. And then the other film that affected me that way was Godard's Breathless. Mm-hmm. I'd never seen jump cuts before. And that got me interested in the craft of filmmaking. So
when you decided you and Richard Franklin decided to tackle a Psycho 2, and I've heard you say you knew the critics were going to kill you.
Oh, it was
so you were between a
desperation.
rock and a hard place because you knew that, but you also knew you couldn't not do it. You couldn't not seize an opportunity like that.
No, I had to go for it, even if it was suicide. Now you got to remember the only film. Well, I had a big movie of the week, is what they called, and then called Initiation of Sarah.
Oh yeah, Gilbert and I were talking about that one last night.
Okay, well that was like 1977, I think, And that was the first time. That was where they threw the girl in a fountain, and she came out wearing a T-shirt, and you could see her hard nipples, and it was a scandal.
Is that Morgan Fairchild?
Yeah, Morgan Fairchild. It was on the front cover of the Sunday LA Times in the calendar section, which then was, that and the trades were all that you had for the business, and that had created quite a stir. And then I got The Beast Within, which was an original. There was a book, a novel, but the writer was in a divorce or had a nervous breakdown or something, and what Harvey Bernhard had bought was the title. So all I had to work off was the title. And this is where you get into being a writer. I thought it was a terrific script, and it was the last movie that United Artists produced or released after the cataclysm of Heaven's Gate.
Oh yes.
So The Beast Within was the last gasp of United Artists, and it had gone out and it had made money, but it got lost in the disaster of Heaven's Gate. So after that, I thought, well, my goodness, I finally have written the feature, and I couldn't get a job for a year.
After Beast Within.
And the Beast Within has something in common with Humanoids from the Deep in that it's monster rape.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
A rape.
It starts with a rape and it ends with a rape.
Yes.
I pulled the names for the cast from Lovecraft.
Oh, that's interesting.
But really, what that movie, the underlying theme of that movie was the sins of the parents being visited on the children, because the father had been turned into a monster by the people who locked him in the cellar and fed him human bodies for years, and the kid comes back because he somehow the spirit reaches out to him and he turns into the father. But I mean, it's also a riff on love and and reaching sexuality and all of those things. Anyway, it had a lot of themes underneath it, and a lot of it got buried anyway.
Very disturbing movie.
It's got one of the longest and most fun transformation scenes.
Oh, when Michael's chained to the bed, the hospital bed,
yes,
and Billy comes out.
Well, that's Philippe Mora, and Philippe is a human being and a dear friend. I mean, a wonderful human being and a dear friend, and very, very sophisticated. And I think that he thought that the whole movie was funnier than I thought it was. So he played it for comedy. So that was at the moment when effects were really all they could do was inflate balloons underneath latex.
Yeah,
which I loved.
Yeah, but it's still pretty terrifying.
But he hung on it too long. He should have cut it more. He should have cut it quicker, and there should have been more cuts in it because it really could have been terrifying, and instead it sort of slipped into silliness. But that's the writer talking.
It goes on forever, but it's it's so much fun to watch.
And since we're talking about great character actors, we have to mention L.Q. Jones, R.G. Armstrong, Ronnie Cox, Don Gordon.
It was terrific. It was Sam Peckinpah's cast.
Yep.
Pulled out of the West and put into a horror movie in Mississippi.
Yep.
Now, that kid, was he the son of Eleanor Powell?
Yes, he was.
Yes.
Good call,
he
Gil.
was.
You impressed me.
Yeah, see?
Yes, he was and is.
This is the pathetic shit that we know.
Listen, when I hear cicadas in the summer, I still think of that movie.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's used as a device, as a recurring device.
It was to be a visual metaphor for the transformation of the boy into the monster.
Yep.
And they didn't know how to do it because this was before CGI. And I said, go out and go get some of that natural, nature footage, and where you see the cicadas dropping off the tree. Go into a close-up where they shuck their shell and they turn into these beautiful creatures.
You know the part that makes me crack up in the transformation scene, when it's like about 10 minutes into it, and he's changed, his head's blown up, his skin's fallen off, and then his eyes are getting big, and one of the actors goes, "Oh my God." And you go, well, isn't it a little too late for the oh my God?
That cast is good.
I'll give you another one. I thought, the monster's so. And then I don't know, a couple of years ago, I saw the sketches and I saw the sculpture that Rob Bottin had done, and the work was just beautiful. I mean, incredible. And what Philippe did was he slathered the monster with so much blood you couldn't see that its tail work. So
it's a movie that stays with you, I'll tell you.
Well, thank you. Because all this is sort of I'm acting humble, but all of this is sort of amazing, that Frank, because I didn't have any sense that this was happening to me, or that people were remembering my movies.
Of course.
But the culture wasn't there 20 years ago, Frank. It's all been the last 12, 15 years that it started to grow in popular culture.
It's interesting. Might be the internet has something to do with that.
And I just remembered something, jumping back to Christopher Lee, that I've heard interviews where he talks about himself as being like the #1 World War II hero.
Oh, where he's a Nazi, Nazi killer.
Yes.
Yeah, he said he was a Nazi killer.
And
was he using the third person?
and yes. And then they spoke to some guy who was in the army with him, a general or whatever, and said he was okay. He wasn't anything special.
Yeah.
A great on-screen villain, though. You can't beat the Wicker Man.
No, you got a point there.
Oh, he played those creeps better than anybody.
Well, there was an interesting Oliver Reed.
Oliver Reed, another guy.
There was an interesting group there, for a few years in the 50s around Hammer.
Absolutely.
Well, Jimmy Sangster. His work as a writer director, but as a writer mainly. They turned him loose when the success of Psycho came out. Hammer said, "Well, we got to get into some psychological horror," and they got Jimmy Sangster, and he did 5 or 6 really interesting scripts.
I just want to go back before we jump on, and we go all over the place here, Tom, as you see, with no rhyme or reason. But I want to talk. I want to talk about Hitchcock again. I want to talk about Psycho 2, and the challenge of it. And you and Richard Franklin, you screened every Hitchcock picture before you guys got underway. Even the silence?
Oh yeah, every one of them. I think we started with Murder.
That might be the first one. I can't remember. There's The Lodger. There's Blackmail. There's so many.
Well,
of them.
This is pre-Lodger.
Oh, okay.
Lodger was the breakout, and the guy who ran the studio, Gaumont or whatever it was in London, thought it was terrible and kept it on the shelf for over a year. And Hitchcock was suicidal. I was lucky enough to work with Richard Franklin. Richard Franklin is passed now, but Richard thought, and with good reason, the 2 greatest directors were Hitchcock and John Ford, and he was equally knowledgeable about both. And when he hired me to write Psycho 2, he set me down, and we went through every Hitchcock film, starting with The Silence all the way up to, I don't know what, Cemetery Plot or
Family
whatever.
Plot, the last one.
Family Plot.
Yeah.
And
they weren't easy to get hold of in those days. It wasn't like now.
What we did is, because we had the access, we would go down to the screening room at Universal, at the studio. And we would go down there and we would sit there and we would watch them.
Wow.
And what he was doing was he was looking for visual set pieces. And he wanted to pull as many good ones as he could and put them in Psycho 2. And by visual set pieces, he meant those moments where the story moved forward with a minimum amount of dialogue, and it was all filmmaking, And what it did is by doing that, it was like getting a graduate seminar in Hitchcock and how to make Hitchcock films. That's like that experience has influenced me my entire life, because you remember Hitchcock's famous dictum about the difference between surprise or shock and suspense. And the difference is if somebody places the dynamite under the table and if you, the audience member, knows about it, it's suspense. If you don't know about it and the table explodes, that's surprise or shock. Well, that's what I did in Child's Play. I came up with, I kept looking for some way to make that work. I wanted to do a killer doll movie. I wanted to do a killer doll movie because of Trilogy of Terror.
Oh, based on the Richard Matheson story, yeah.
Oh boy, well, yeah. That's Dan Curtis. That was a great piece of filmmaking.
Love Dan. We talk about Dan Curtis on this show a lot.
Well, Dan Curtis was a very difficult guy. When I was doing soaps in New York, I was working at ABC on 67th Street, and Dan Curtis was a floor above me or 2 floors above me, and he was starting Dark Shadows. Mm-hmm. And then the last job I professionally had as an actor was 1982's Winds of War, which Dan Curtis directed. And he didn't direct it. He didn't direct particularly. He shouted at you. No, move over there. That's what he was like. But he did Trilogy of Terror, which I think were 4 short stories by Richard Matheson. And one of them is the Zumi doll. Prey, I think it was called.
Was the name of the
Karen
story.
Black.
Yeah,
Karen Black,
right,
yes.
Right.
And this is before Steadicams. And he took what they then called an Elmo or camera, a 16 mil camera, and he put it on roller skates. And it was about ankle high. And it had very, very small reels, in maybe 2 minutes of film. And he used the roller skates and that little camera, and he chased after her at ankle height. And then he would cut to a close-up of the doll, which was a wooden figure about 1.5 feet high. And he put it in front of the camera and he'd shake it. And then he'd cut back. Then he'd cut back to the moving point of view. And it was absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
He put sound behind it too. But it was absolutely terrifying. And nobody had done that. And that's why I wanted to do Child's Play. And then I had to figure out how to construct those visual set pieces that I could make work with a moving point of view, because I knew if I ever got in trouble with the doll, and since that was an instant before CGI, if the doll didn't work in real in front of the camera, the doll didn't work at all. I knew if I got in trouble, I could cut to a moving point of view, and that's what I did throughout that movie. But what I took from Hitchcock about that was the opening hook, the opening scene. Is the Lakeside Strangler, Brad Dourif, putting his as he's dying, he puts his soul into that doll. So as an audience member, that something is terribly wrong with that doll. And then poor Karen buys it as a birthday present from a bum for her son. And you as the audience member are sitting there and saying that doll is evil, but Karen and little Andy don't know that. That's suspense, and that's because of what I learned from Richard Franklin and writing Psycho 2 and looking at all the Hitchcock movies.
But that's that scene where the batteries fall out.
Yes.
When she's about to throw the box in the trash.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great moment. It's a great moment in a horror film. It's a moment you never forget.
Okay, but that is, thank you. But that's the beginning. I timed it. That's the beginning of a solid 8-minute suspense sequence. And I keep ratcheting it up. She comes back from the police station. She's in despair because everybody thinks her son's a murderer. And Alex Vincent was 7 years old at the time. But the boy's insane. He thinks his doll's alive. How ridiculous is that? That can't be true.
And
so she goes to throw away the box, and oh my God, the batteries fall out. Yes, you're right. It's heart-stopping.
It is.
But then she goes in, and she picks up the doll, and she turns it over on its face down, and she takes and she opens the battery compartment, and it's empty. And then, a la The Exorcist, the head does a 180, so it's staring up at her. And says, "Want to play?" or what? I can't remember now. But in
like
terror,
that. It runs under the couch.
Well, it not runs. She drops it.
That's right. She drops it and it scurries.
It rolled under because I put the couch and a piece of plywood and a piece of the rug at a 45-degree angle. So and then I Dutched the camera. So when it hit the rug, it goes under like it's supernatural. But then she gets down on her hands and knees, and slowly she lifts up the couch, the skirt of the couch, and looks into the blackness underneath. And there's nothing more vulnerable than somebody with a naked eye, looking at something that it's the Lakeside Strangler now, and is looking it's looking at her like 3 inches away. She's as vulnerable as she could be, and instead, it doesn't attack her. She pulls it out, and she lifts it in her hands, and she says, now she's starting to think, well, her son's right. This doll is supernatural. Something's going on here. And she shakes the doll, but she can't get anything out of the doll. So then she takes and she lights the gas fireplace, and she threatens to throw the doll into it. And previous to that, I had used a good guy voice, a voice with a filter on it that made it sound doll-like. And for the first time, I went full ahead with Brad Dourif's voice. You dirty bitch, let me go, and it was absolutely fucking terrifying.
Absolutely.
I mean, and she drops it, and because the doll attacks her, it attacks her throat, it bites her, and she drops it, and then the doll scurries out. And I shot the doll behind all these pieces of furniture, the couch and everything, so you couldn't see the puppeteers underneath. But the doll looks like it's moving at 100 miles an hour. Then she races down racing after the elevator, the birdcage elevator going down, comes out the front, looks up and down the street, and Chucky's gone. That's an 8-minute sequence. And it doesn't let you go, and the whole third act is like that. That's Hitchcock. So I learned so much of my suspense from being taken to school by Richard Franklin, and about Hitchcock films, and I'm eternally grateful. And Richard was a very, very talented guy with a huge chunk of the academic about him. I think he ended up teaching at the university in Australia.
Didn't he visit Hitchcock? Wasn't he on the set of Topaz?
He was. Yeah. He was. But this was before. It's hard to explain now because nobody thinks of things in their historical perspective or at the moment in time in which they happened. When Richard was at USC, he invited Hitchcock down to the film department to talk. Nobody had ever done that.
Wow.
Hitchcock had never been asked before.
That's crazy.
I mean, yeah, and they became, I don't know if friends is the right word, but, certainly, he worshiped Hitchcock, and Hitchcock did invite him on Topaz. But I can tell other stories. I knew Paul Newman, and Paul Newman said touring Curtain was one of the worst experiences he had ever had as an actor, because all Hitchcock said to him was, here, look over there, right over there, look there for 3 seconds, then turn your head and look over here. And that was all the direction he got from Hitchcock, that kind of thing, because Hitchcock was doing bits and pieces to put it together, because he had all the storyboards that he'd put up, in his, he had a suite, a cabana, whatever it's called, on the Universal lot. And he would work and he would cut the film before he ever shot anything. And then once he did it, he stuck to it.
So Newman resented just kind of being moved around like a prop.
Yes, but that goes to Hitchcock saying actors are cattle.
Right.
That's he didn't really mean it, I don't think. Well, you can't say that. Ingrid Bergman was luminescent.
Oh, there's great performances and
Oh yeah. So somehow that didn't work that way, but
Olivier and Rebecca.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Great performances.
And before I forget, what was Brad Dourif like?
I had used Brad in the Whoopi Goldberg movie Fatal Beauty. And if you go look at that, you'll see he's doing the Lakeshore Strangler there too. So it wasn't a very big reach. And think about it this way: I saw Brad recently. He sort of lost his sense of humor, but the Brad is in just the opening scene of Child's Play, and after that, it's only when the doll comes alive in her hand and attacks her that his voice comes in, and not the good guy voice. And he's been the voice of Chucky now through God knows how many sequels or whatever, and he's made a fortune. He only appeared as an actor in one scene in the original.
Wow.
Incredible. That goes back to the Norman Bates thing with Anthony Perkins. You never know that you're just doing a job, that it's actually going to become this long-running iconic thing.
Well, yes, but in Brad's case, Brad's an Academy Award quality actor.
Yeah.
He really is a hell of an actor. But the voice work there is, that everybody will always think of him as being the voice of Chucky, I think.
Although he always seems like he's slipping into a Jack Nicholson as Chucky.
Well,
you ever see Wise Blood, the Houston picture? He's great in that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, terrific
And also
actor.
Ragtime, in a small part in Ragtime. Good in everything.
Once everything, but it never. You can also see him in movies like Tobe Hooper's Shocker, which isn't so good. Well, no, that's the bitchy part of me. But Toby's gone now. Toby was a dear friend, but I went to Toby's memorial, and they had it at the New Beverly, the theater down here in Beverly Drive that Tarantino owns.
One of my old haunts.
Okay, mine too.
Yeah,
and actually, it wasn't that well attended. And it wasn't that well attended because it coincided with Memorial Day weekend, I think. But, those of us who were in town and who really loved him were there. Amanda Plummer was there. A lot of the group that Toby had from Austin. And Toby used to call. I said, "Why the hell did you ever leave?" And Toby said, "Well, when I was there, it was a dust spot." So he was getting out. But if you looked at Toby's filmography, at all the films he'd done, there was Texas Chainsaw stands out, heads above all the rest. Texas Chainsaw is flat out brilliant. And it was breaking through to a new level of horror and graphic, even though it's not that graphic now. But it's
by today's standards. Didn't you have lunch at his house, Gilbert, Tobe Hooper? You spend an afternoon with him?
I went to Tobe Hooper's house, basically because my favorite Tobe Hooper film is Life Force, where Matilda May is a naked girl vampire.
Mm-hmm.
I see.
And
That's why you went.
And so Toby put it up on the big screen, and he told me little secret movie stuff that she started getting. She had to shave to be the naked female vampire, and she started getting very painful ingrown pubic hair.
Oh my God!
Too much shaving.
That's too much information.
So when you watch Life Force, that's something to think about.
Well, I'll tell you, because I know the Life Force and Invaders from Mars, what he did for Golem Globus, were the high points of really having a budget to work with. And so, and then it was more up and down. And, it's just interesting. But the 70s, where I was trying to break through, because I was an actor I've been a member of SAG since 1961. And I acted all the way through. I was the lead in a pilot called The Young Lawyers, and it went to series, and they dropped me. And they went with Zalman King. And that was a mistake. And then they didn't have any ratings, and they desperately tried to bring back a good-looking guy in the second season. That didn't work either. But anyway, when that happened, I'd already gone back to UCLA, and I was getting an education. And I'd always wanted to write, and I've always wanted to write. I always wanted to write novels. I've been trying to write a novel since I was 13 or 14 years old, and I couldn't do it. And so, in frustration, I became a screenwriter. And for however it works, I could do that. And I was coming up as a screenwriter throughout the 70s. And, it was a time of great self-destruction in Hollywood. There was just so much snow around. I mean, it was, I'm surprised anybody survived and got to 1980.
And yet so many great films come out of that period, so many great American films.
Because the studios were lost.
Yeah.
Because because the whole system had crashed.
The inmates were running the asylum, so to speak.
Well, that really took off in '68 with Easy Rider.
Right. We had Peter here.
Well, if you want to talk about an inmate, talk about Dennis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All those guys.
Well, Peter seemed more sane to me than Dennis, but I don't know.
But just the Rafelson and Schneider and Friedkin and Coppola and Hal Ashby and all of those guys. I mean, it's a Renaissance period.
Oh, it's both great, but I mean, being there has to be one of the greatest movies I've ever seen.
Wonderful.
But I don't know if anybody remembers it now. Hal Ashby I thought was God.
There's a new documentary, I think, about Hal Ashby.
Yes, I've read about it. I haven't seen it.
Yeah.
And all the great Jack Nicholson movies that came out in the 70s.
Yeah, with the directors I just named.
Yeah.
Well, Five Easy Pieces. Well, I forgot Polanski.
Yeah. Well, Last Detail.
And Five Easy
films.
Pieces and so many.
Well,
King of Marvin Gardens.
They were groping for a formula. And then you still had some freedom when I came in through the 80s, but it started to shut down in the late 80s and in the early 90s. It certainly did. They killed the star system and they went with tent poles. They didn't want to pay Arnold $20 million a movie anymore.
Just one last question about Child's Play, Tom. And by the way, there's a New York Magazine, the new issue. I don't know if you saw it. They rank the 100 scares that changed horror, and Child's Play is right here on the list.
Kidding.
Yeah,
I didn't know.
I'll send this to you. Thanks to the scene in which Chucky springs to life in the arms of Andy's mom, this movie did for dolls what Poltergeist did for clowns. The demon doll trope had existed before, but Chucky, voiced by the incomparable Brad Dourif, is its true peak. So,
well, it was a breakout film on what I was trying to do technically. I mean, you'd had the Leprechaun movie. They'd had a couple of movies with small people, but nobody had attempted to do what I did.
Was Talking Tina one of the inspirations too for this? Well, the Twilight Zone episode.
I think that Talking Tina was more of an inspiration for the guy who wrote the original script, which was Mancini, and it was called Blood
Buddies, yeah.
But it has nothing to do with Child's Play. I didn't use any of it.
Telly Savalas.
Yeah.
But those are moral tales. If you look at what he was doing, Serling,
you mean?
Yeah, Rod Serling was doing, they were shows that had a point to prove, they had a theme that was stated, even if it was oblique in the end. I mean, I think that's where the original idea for Langoliers came from.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, we were all my generation were all in, because you had AIP and Hammer, that was horror, and then you had EC Comics. And EC Comics were banned in 54 or 55.
Absolutely.
But if you look at those are all, they're set up, a couple of pages of mid-story and then a twist. And they're all moral tales too. And you see the influence of EC Comics in so many of Stephen King's short stories.
Yeah. Well, you got to do 3 episodes of Tales from the Crypt yourself. That must have been a kick for a kid who grew up reading those.
Well, yes, but that was why I did the third one ever done. Killer Come Hack to Me, I think it was called.
Yeah, Lover Come Hack to Me.
Lover Come Hack, and that was Amanda Plummer.
Right.
She's brilliant. You want to talk about extraordinary actors? Mm-hmm. Amanda. But then the best one I thought was the one that I did, Four-Sided Triangle, that I did with Patricia Arquette.
Uh-huh.
And then this is why I love Dick Donner. I want to praise Dick Donner. Not only does he have a brilliant filmography, but he's probably the most decent major director that I've ever met in my life. I mean, now maybe that's because he was a fair amount older than I was, but he was giving, he was sweet, and he got me the job of splitting a pilot with him, which was Two-Fisted Tales.
Uh-huh.
And he did, the half that he did was about Billy the Kid, and the half that I did was called King of the Road. And I cast an unknown actor, and I cast him because the producer of the first year of Tales of the Crypt was a sterling producer named Bill Teitler, and I don't know what happened to him, but he did quality shows in that first year, and he pushed me to look at this actor, and the actor was Brad Pitt.
Oh, that's right.
So Brad, and I tried to get Brad an agent, and and I asked the agent I had at the time. He said, "No, name's not big enough."
Oh, jeez.
I mean, no, I got I'm filled with stories like that.
I'd like to also say that Richard Donner is a wonderful podcast guest. Well, obviously you saw him here. You heard him here.
I listened to an hour and 36 minutes. He's the only guy. I walked from his office. We went and had lunch at the commissary of Warner Brothers, and you couldn't get across through the sound stages without people saying, "Hi, Dick, how are you, Dick?" I mean, he was loved.
Yes.
I mean, if you listen to that podcast, he did an hour and 36 minutes. He never said anything bad about anybody.
No.
Do you know how extraordinary that is? To have spent 50 years working in this town?
Even the Salkinds, and he wants to say bad things about them.
Well, no, the only one he dissed a little bit was...
Spengler, yeah.
No, it was Jackie Gleason.
Oh, Gleason.
Oh, that's
Gleason.
right.
Yeah, he didn't like the other guy on Superman either.
Who was that?
Pierre Spengler, the guy that was...
Oh, here's something.
the guy that I think he had removed.
As a Twilight Zone fan, how come the original Twilight Zone stand up so well, and they've made like a bunch of... They've tried to bring back Twilight Zone a few times, and they never seem to work.
Well, it's Rod Serling.
Yeah.
A missing ingredient.
Well, it's the writing. I mean, it's somewhere at home. I have the last and never filmed season of Twilight Zone written by Rod Serling, and every one of them is a moral tale wrapped up as drama. But every one of them, is a comment on humanity, how we're great to each other or how we're terrible to each other. And you read, and I've read, I don't know if it was true, but I read he was writing them on an airplane. I mean, when he's flying back and forth between the coasts. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I know that one of the first people who helped me, Dick Berg, producer, I acted for him in a Chrysler Theater, which was a huge show.
Oh, Bob Hope's Chrysler Theater.
That's right, probably around 65, 66, 67. I was in Bus Riley's Back in Town, which was also with Michael. He passed away a couple of years ago. Anyway, the Dick was in awe of Rod Serling, who lived just down the street from him. So I heard stories about Rod, and they were all. He was a god among writers. I mean, the rest of us are like pygmies. And he was a giant. And I got a Roddy story for you. We're shooting Fright Night, and at that time I was smoking, and I mean, I would walk around with a cup of coffee and a cigarette in my hand, and I never had it out because I was such a nervous wreck. My first movie to direct.
Sure.
And Roddy sidles up to me and said, "That's what Rod Serling did all the time, cigarettes and coffee, and he died of lung cancer." So, I remember that, too.
Roddy was looking out for you.
Jeez.
Well, Roddy...
He was in that Night Gallery episode, of course, so with
Yeah, well, Roddy and stuff. Well, I'll give you another story. I'd go over and see Dick in his palatial offices, and he was like, phenomenal director. And I still wasn't able to kick the Jones, with cigarettes. In fact, that's the hardest addiction I've ever had to deal with. But Dick would say, he'd look at me longingly as I took a drag of his cigarette, and he said, come on, stand up. And he would take me into his closet. And in his closet, because he didn't want his wife to know, we'd pass the cigarette back and forth. True story.
Let me ask you one thing about Fright Night too that Gilbert will appreciate. Do I have this right, Tom? Is there an Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein homage?
Oh, there sure is. There sure is. It's on the stairway.
Yes, indeed.
I mean that's almost a straight lift. They shoot Billy Cole.
Right.
They shoot him to the forehead. He goes down the stairway and lands up dead at the bottom. Roddy and Bill Ragsdale, Charlie, think that they're finally rid of this vampire helper. And they turn and they start up the stairway. And then behind them, we see over their shoulder, we see Billy Cole dead, get up. And he starts up the stairway after them. And everybody's looking towards the camera as they go up the stairway. And all of a sudden, Roddy and Bill and Charlie stop because they hear the steps creaking behind them. And they whirl, and there's Billy Cole coming towards them with a hole in his forehead and his hands outstretched to strangle him. That's Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein.
It's Glenn Strange, right? Where he's sneaking up.
Yeah.
On
that's one of the funniest. Well, that's one of the funniest movies I ever saw.
It's Gilbert's favorite.
Abbott and Costello Abbott and Costello were great. Laurel and Hardy were great.
Indeed.
The comedian who never changed the look on his face. Brilliant.
Keaton, the stone face.
Yeah.
And in Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, the horror works in it too.
That's what's so good about it. Works on both levels.
Yeah.
We assume you're a fan of the Universal classics too, then, Tom, the James Whale stuff, and
yes, all of it.
Yeah,
all of it. But I didn't. I really. A lot of the enthusiasm I had as a kid was for sci-fi. That was a step before fantasy. I grew up on Heinlein and Asimov.
Okay.
And, all those the boys novels that Heinlein wrote. Asimov wrote everything. I think he wrote them in a week. Those were just great. I'm pre-film school.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
I wanted so desperately to. I'm from Highland, New York, which is across the Hudson Bridge from Poughkeepsie. Nobody in Highland, New York ever got out. A good job in Highland, New York was working for the post office and driving the bus. I'm overstating it. Really, it became a bedroom community for IBM. Those were the white-collar jobs. And then I spent a lot of time also in Austining. But my grandfather was in Highland, and my parents would send me up from Austining on the New York Central, and I'd spend the weekends there in Highland. Anyway, we didn't know anybody. I didn't know anybody. You didn't know anybody, did you, Gilbert?
No connection to showbiz.
No connections either. So I don't know how we ever.
You guys grew up on film and comic books and Tales from the Crypt and Asimov, and you just were driven. You were driven to do it.
Yeah, but I didn't know how. I became an actor because I wanted to get into film, not because I wanted to be an actor.
Oh, interesting.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I got a question for you here, Tom. Since we're talking about Roddy McDowall playing the horror host, I got a question for you from one of our previous guests who was a real-life horror host. Do you know Sven Gulli out of Chicago?
Yes, of course.
A friend of the show.
Our friend Rich Cos.
Yeah.
And he says, please ask Tom, I heard a rumor that the effects people made a mistake on Fright Night and almost glued Evil Ed's mouth shut by accident. Stephen Jeffries. Is this true?
I'll have to ask Stephen. I'll have to ask Stephen Jeffries about that. The great one I remember is that I was blocking the scene with Charlie and Amanda in the basement, where she comes down in the flowing white dress and and the falsies that are making her zoptic, and she says, Charlie, you promised, meaning you promised to protect me and you failed, and that breaks Charlie down, and he steps forward and says, Amy, and she turned away, and all I was going to do was have her turn back and attack him. But it was it was Friday, and I saw all of a sudden that was a huge scare, and I had Steve Johnson, and maybe it was Randy Cook too, but it sure as hell was Steve, and I said, give me a shark's mouth, give me a mouth that'll scare the hell out of every man in the audience, and that was where they created that mouth almost like overnight.
It's great.
And yeah, and I got to tell you that image, and Steve said, well, it's not a great piece. You'll never use it anywhere but this, will you? And I said, of course not. Just give me the scare. And it turns out to be the image on the one sheet.
Oh, great. Well, he has like a Renfield quality, that actor, almost like a Dwight Fry. You know, yes, Stephen Jeffries gets bitten in the alleyway. Well, by Chris Sarandon.
Yeah, the Renfrew character was really Billy Cole.
Right, that's right.
The helper.
Right.
Stephen Jeffries, there was everything you're trying to do subtext with so much of this. It's not what people are saying. It's not the literal meaning of the words. It's the emotion underneath it that you're trying to carry through. Gilbert, when you were in that scene in Beverly in Cop 2, you're really trying to get out of a hard situation, and you're trying to offer an oblique bribe, But so it's not about one hand and the other, but it's a clever way of trying to get out of a difficult situation. So much there because vampires they're really any sex at all. And so the subtext beneath Chris Sarandon, Jerry Dandridge, offering to protect Stephen Jeffries, and you knew Stephen, he's called Evil Ed, for God's sakes, in school. He was the guy that was not popular, that everybody laughed at and thought was weird. And the undercurrent of that is homosexuality, is gay. And at the time, I never know how much to say. Stephen is gay. I didn't know that, but I realized it, when we were shooting, and so I was trying to be at that moment in time. I was trying to be supportive of live and let live, and that read as subtext.
And by the way, we're talking about how great McDowell is, but also Chris Sarandon in that movie is just terrific.
Chris Sarandon is another one. Chris Sarandon is an Academy Award quality actor.
Wonderful.
Yeah, he won for what? The picture about the bank with
Dog Day Afternoon.
Dog Day Afternoon.
Great
performance.
Yeah, but good in Princess Bride. A lot of things.
Well, I mean, yes, and he's never been as recognized as he should have been either. I mean, I know these people's careers. I mean, the film that wiped Chris out was Lipstick, directed by Michael Winner.
Right, who directed your material.
Yes, who directed Scream for Help, which was voted one of the worst movies of the 80s. No, they ran it down at the New Beverly as a comedy. Yeah. Wow. And I just got 10 copies from Shout Factory and all their beneficence, because they just released it as a Blu-ray. So I've got 10 copies, which I will autograph for anybody who wants to go to my website, THTerratime, and buy one, but I've only got 10.
Gilbert and I will want one. Yes. Here's another question from a friend of yours, Mick Garris.
Yeah, Mick.
Who was on this show with us, another master of horror. Please ask Tom, when will he write his autobiography?
Oh boy, I'm just entering into copy editing now on my first novel that I'm getting published. It's really my fourth novel, but the first novel that I'm getting published called The Boy, and I don't know if I could write my autobiography, because I'll give you. I used to say that to Roddy. I'd listen to his stories, and I say, please, there's so much oral history. Please write your autobiography. And Roddy kept saying, I can't. I really do know where the bodies are buried.
Oh my God!
Wow.
He meant literally, huh?
Well, but think about that, because he went to children's school with them.
Yeah, he was in the studio system, right, as a child.
But as a child,
Sure.
he was at 20th and then at MGM.
Yeah.
And one of the most astounding afternoons I ever spent was with him as they were closing down MGM. And as a PR gimmick, they had the lion being let out the gates by the Thalberg building. And Roddy took me through the studio, and he would point to this stage or that stage and tell me what movies had been made there.
Wow.
He remembered the 40s and from the 40s into the 50s. And then he would also point to the because they had 2 rows of wardrobe actors, for the actors to change clothes and get makeup and all that. And he would tell me who was having an affair with whom and what assignations and what areas they'd met in. coming out of the Thalberg building onto the lot out the side door of the Thalberg building. He pointed out where Katharine Hepburn met Spencer Tracy.
Wow.
He took me down into the tunnels that ran underneath MGM, and they still had the nitrate prints down there, and they had the tunnels where they ran the electric and the gas through, and it was just phenomenal. And then we went to the building where they had the MGM library. So when you do the historical pictures, you could go there and research the clothes and the architecture. And it's one of the worst things in my life. The librarian was there, and he was weeping because they were throwing everything into the bins because Krikorian could have cared less. It was all about. Well, he kept buying and reselling it and everything else. And every time he did, he stripped more and more of it away. The greatest studio in Hollywood, the greatest studio probably we've ever known. In terms of producing quality classical movies.
Well, that's heartbreaking that they didn't have any respect for the legacy and for.
Well, Roddy said to me, and he said it several times. He said Hollywood has no history, and that's true.
Yeah, I was shocked when I first moved there, and I found out there was no Hollywood museum. There was no. I mean, there's the Walk of Fame, but there was no place where you could actually go and see the history collected.
No, there isn't.
In
there
one
still
place.
isn't.
And still
there
isn't.
Still isn't.
And, it's just like TV shows, classic TV, where they burn the stuff to have room.
Oh, the old
on
Carson
the shelves,
shows where they just recorded over them. The
Ernie
original.
Kovacs.
Ernie Kovacs too. Yeah, all that stuff is lost.
They were the kinescopes.
Yeah, that's all lost.
Yes, and Gilbert, you're talking a genius. Ernie Kovacs was a genius too in his time. And that was just when I was becoming vaguely aware. You're back around 1954, 5, 6.
I heard one of the workers called Ernie Kovacs' wife and said, I think you better come over here right away. They're destroying all of his shows, if you could save any of them.
Yeah. Well, they called them kinescopes, is what they called them.
Yeah.
2 last ones, and we'll let you get out of here, Tom.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I've talked nonstop, and I really wanted to know. I wanted to know about you guys and about Gilbert too. We should work together sometime, Gilbert.
We should. When are you in New York, Tom? You come here from time to time?
I have from time to time, but I've become since I've started writing, I finally after 50 or 60 years, I'm finally writing novels. I'm finally ending up where I started. I'm finally doing what I wanted to do at 13 or 14.
Good for you.
And but Frank, I feel like I'm running out of time. This is the kind of stuff, you want to keep it light. You want to keep it hopeful for all the young people who are listening.
We have no young people listening. Except for that gentleman that I see there in the corner.
Well, I've got a great one-liner for you.
Go ahead.
And it's that's Mark Miller, and I want to give him a plug.
Thank you for setting this up.
Yeah, I want to. Mark Miller. I did an audiobook. I narrate it, and he wrote it, and it's called Hellraiser: The Toll, and it's a full cast, and it'll be available on Audible.
Wonderful.
But anyway, Mark Miller had a great one-liner. Dorothy Parker, late 40s. Hollywood is the only place you can die of encouragement.
Yes, I always love that one.
You know it?
Yeah, it's a great line.
I'll give you another one from Stuart Stern, who was terribly, terribly important in my life. Stuart wrote, among other things,
Rebel Without a Cause?
Rebel Without a Cause, yeah. And Stuart said, you never lose your writing talent, but it sure can hide for a while.
I like that. Tell us about Anthony Quinn and Ingrid Bergman, if you have anything.
Well,
Gilbert met Anthony Quinn too.
Well, Ingrid was the real star. She was luminescent. Mm-hmm. Whatever it was, her face was like a mirror. Whatever she felt was there on her face was reflected on her face. It was one of the most facile talents I have ever seen. And I would ride to and from location with her. And she would regale me with these stories about people that I didn't know because I was too young. I think I was like 24, 23, 25. Anyway, about singing bawdy songs with Gary Cooper when they were making in Spain For Whom the Bells Toll. Mm-hmm. About working with Hitchcock. And I didn't really know who Hitchcock was then. Well, I knew who he was, but I didn't understand what she was talking about. She was talking about Suspicion with Gary Cooper. And I'm sitting there.
Cary Grant.
Right. Yeah, Cary Grant. And, I knew she was wonderful, she was kind, and she was just on the edge of being matronly, but she wasn't there yet. She was still hot. And she was a major talent.
Didn't you get to smooch her in a scene?
I French kissed her, and then Tony comes up and he kills me.
Right.
And then after he called cut, Tony turns to him and said, "You like that?" Says furiously to Ingrid. He says, "You really liked that, didn't you? You like that kid, don't you?" And he was jealous, and I didn't understand why. And then somebody told me that they had an affair when they did a movie of Darren Matt's The Visit.
Wow.
So, I didn't like Tony. Tony was a huge star, but he was a small human being. So, but he was another egomaniac. He wasn't as obvious as Christopher Lee. But there was a he could also be difficult, which is another way of saying nasty, know?
So you tongue-kissed Ingrid Bergman.
Not bad.
Yeah.
That should be somewhere in the epitaph.
I was so impressed. Do you know who the stunt coordinator was on Walk in the Spring Rain? Try Bruce Lee.
How about that? That's good.
Oh my God.
That's cool.
Yeah, Bruce Lee choreographed my fight scenes.
That's cool.
Oh, you can't get better than that.
No, I'll tell you about that the next time we get together.
Next time. And tell us about seeing the Beatles at Shea Stadium next time.
That scared the hell out of me. We almost got mobbed. My wife and I, we weren't married at the time. Because I was a soap opera star, Gilbert.
He was mobbed at the Beatles concert because he was a star. He was recognized from a soap.
1966.
Love it.
And that's when I said, I don't know if I like this.
We'll do it again, Tom.
Yeah.
There's so many other areas we didn't get to.
Well, I thank you very much, and I think this is a terrific podcast you're doing.
Thank you, man.
Oh, thank you.
We should tell our listeners that when we started, Tom was saying, I know so many of the people that you've had here. We were running names past him, like Richard Donner, like Peter Bogdanovich, and Barry Levinson, and Alan Arkush, and Joe Dante, and Roger Corman, and you said, and Bruce Dern, and you said you had stories about all of them.
About all of them. Well,
One day.
I'm like Zelig or whoever the guy was in the Woody Allen movie.
Zelig.
Yeah, I've always been around, but I've never been important. But I was always there watching.
So, you're the perfect guest for this show. You're the perfect Halloween guest, and we have to thank Mark for making this happen. So, Mark Miller, thank you again.
Absolutely. This was a pleasure.
So,
gentlemen.
I'm Gilbert Gottfried. This has been Gilbert Gottfried's amazing Colossal podcast with my co-host, Frank Santopadre. And unfortunately, I have to apologize. We couldn't get the Tom Holland from the Spider-Man pictures. So you got to do what you can get at the last minute.
I'll throw one more in there. I've got a Fright Night comic book that we just came out with. You can find it on my website, TH Terror Time, first edition.
THTerrorTime.com.
Right, and I thank both of you, Frank and Gilbert. And Gilbert, I'm sorry that we didn't get a chance to talk more.
Next time.
Next time, yeah.
We'll come to New York and we'll walk out to dinner.
Okay.
We'll talk about Shelley Winters.
Oh, my God. Oh, my God.
That'll be a whole episode.
Yeah, that'll be a whole episode.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Tom.